With the next generation of video games, with the PS5 and Xbox Series X and S, console wars have definitely gone from and they're not really a thing anymore. So I think it will be fun to look back through console wars throughout the ages and see how they've evolved, starting from the second generation.
The reason why I'm not going into this generation is because it wasn't really a war, more of an experimental year for the industry, with 1972's Magnavox Odyssey being the first game console ever. People didn't try to compete with it, just to try to make their own version with it. It wasn't until the second generation where the wars got really serious. So let's move on, shall we? As we enter the second generation of video games, we have the Atari 2600, the Intellivision by Mattel, and the ColecoVision by Coleco. There were others that competed, but they were... To start the generation, Atari released the Atari 2600 in 1977. It was one of the first game consoles ever to use interchangeable cartridges, and many see it as one of the first video game consoles ever. However, in 1979, Mattel Electronics released the Intellivision to combat the Atari 2600. However, in 1982, Coleco released the ColecoVision. It had lots of highs, including Nintendo's classic arcade games, including Donkey Kong and Donkey Kong Jr. However, it came too close to the game crash of 1983, so due to that, the ColecoVision only sold 2 million, losing the war. The Intellivision only sold 3 million, and Atari won the generation with 32 million units sold. Hey guys, it's me, Super Mario Tom from the future here, and I just wanted to mention the Atari 5200. I forgot to talk about it. It was technically the successor to the Atari 2600, but most of the games were just repackaged Atari 2600 games looking much better, and it also released too close to the game crash of 1983 and 1982. So yeah, I'm just gonna go back to the present, or past, my past, your present. Nintendo released a Nintendo Entertainment System in 1985, and it sold incredibly well, saving the gaming industry from the game crash of 1983. It did so by bundling Rob the Robot in launch and saying that the NES wasn't a game console, but it was a toy. Now with success comes competition, and Sega brought that with their Master System. It did okay in the US, but did really well in power regions, including Brazil, where it sold like crazy over there. The Atari 7800 did okay, but it didn't reach as high as the Sega Master System or the NES. With those two systems units combined, it couldn't get to the half of the NES's power with great games and third-party support.
This generation has one of the most iconic wars ever, the Sega Genesis / Mega Drive versus the Super Nintendo Entertainment System and the TurboGrafx-16, which it didn't sell too well. But I think we should go look at this generation of wars and see all the interesting things about it. In 1989, Hudson Soft released the TurboGrafx-16. It had a few hidden gems, but it failed. It didn't sell that much, and sadly didn't get lots of great games. It did get a few hidden gems though, and it did get a CD add-on, but it didn't sell that well, just like the console. So let's move on to the Genesis / Mega Drive versus the Super Nintendo. In 1989, Sega released the Genesis, or for the rest of the world, Mega Drive, and it did so by launching with a campaign that said Genesis does 16-bit action and the best graphics and sound, and that Nintendo games were for little kids. However, Nintendo struck back by launching the Super Nintendo Entertainment System in 1981, the successor to the NES. When the Super Nintendo launched,
Sega released a new ad campaign that the Genesis had blast processing speed and the Super Nintendo didn't. It didn't really mean much though, and the Super Nintendo kept on selling. Since Sega panicked, they released hardware add-ons, including the Sega CD, which could play CDs, and the Sega 32X. With these combined, the Sega Genesis was much more powerful, but it would soon later get roasted by Nintendo. In 1944, when Nintendo released Donkey Kong Country, they released a brand new ad to market it, and saying that you cannot play it on a Sega Genesis, and it doesn't need to require a 32X or CD add-on, and it was one of the first fully rendered games ever. So with that, Nintendo won the war. In 1994, Sony released their first console, the PlayStation, and it was a really huge success, selling over 100 million units because games were on CDs and third-party developers could make bigger games. Also in 1994, Sega released the Sega Saturn, and unlike the PlayStation, it failed due to poor marketing and releasing in a couple of months after the Sega 32X that Sega didn't really support that much. Due to this, the Saturn failed. In 1996, Nintendo released the Nintendo 64 and it sold pretty well at launch, but after that, the Nintendo 64 didn't continue to sell that much. However, it was still a revolutionary console, bringing back the joystick to the mainstream and introducing Rumble with the Rumble Pack. But the main reason people remember the N64 is because of the great games like Mario 64, GoldenEye, and The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time, and that there are 4 controller ports and great multiplayer titles like Mario Kart 64, Smash Bros, and Mario Party 1, 2, and 3. In 1999, Sega released the Sega Dreamcast to start the generation. It sold okay at launch and had lots of highs, including online in a few games and an evolution of graphics to the last generation at the time. However, when Sony released the PlayStation 2, Sony had already won the war before the Xbox and GameCube had come out. The PlayStation 1 sold over 100 million copies, so most people knew what the PlayStation brand was, and the PlayStation 2 had a DVD player built in, and most DVD players at the time were pretty expensive, and the PS2 could also play video games, so there is no wonder why it's the best-selling console of all time. In 2001, Microsoft released the Xbox as their first console on the market, and for the first time, Microsoft did do pretty well, and even beat Nintendo and Sega. And Microsoft did have lots of exclusives in the Halo series with Halo 1 and 2, and the third-party games ran a lot better on Xbox than on PS3 and the GameCube. As a Nintendo fan, the GameCube is one of the best consoles ever, mostly because of the game library, which is fantastic. But the games were on proprietary discs, so third parties couldn't get their games on it. Due to this, the GameCube didn't sell that well. After the transition from the Genesis to Saturn, and then the Dreamcast failing, Sega had to quit the hardware business and become a third party. Due to this, Sega would not make any more consoles. Microsoft released the Xbox 360 in 2005 and sold well at launch, but it suffered with the technical issues with the infamous Red Ring of Death, where if you got it, your system would basically be dead. So Microsoft had to spend a whole lot of money on repairs, but the 360 was still selling, but then the PS3 came out, and due to it being around $600+, it sold terribly at launch, and for a while the PS3 was a laughingstock. However, in 2009, Sony redesigned it by making it cheaper and gutting features like PS2 backwards compatibility. The PS3 was also getting more exclusives at the time, and Microsoft was trying to make the Xbox 360 an all-in-one console. And in 2010 they released Kinect, and it flopped with a core audience. And then right before the PS4 came out, Sony released The Last of Us, and that got so many people to buy PS3, and thus Sony beat Microsoft. Well, what about Nintendo? They released the Nintendo Wii, and while many people make fun of the motion controls being a gimmick and that the Wii is so underpowered compared to the competition, me and other Nintendo fans will definitely defend this console, as it was a really good console, especially with the games, and that's why the Wii is so underrated in my opinion. And it also did really well with the casual audience because they loved the motion control games like Wii Sports. So that's why it's one of the best selling consoles of all time. Now this is the final war we're going to be looking at today. As since Nintendo with the Wii didn't really try to compete the Xbox 360 and PlayStation Wii with power, and with the next generation being close to the 9th one, which is now, you know, I'm not going to really go on a bit because this video is starting to get a bit long. So yeah, let's talk about the 8th generation. When Nintendo released the Wii U, it didn't sell well at launch, and for the rest of the Wii U's life, it didn't sell well either. And most of the Wii U's great games have been ported or have sequels existing on the Switch, so there isn't really much of a reason to go back to it now. But it had such a cool gimmick with the Wii U gamepad. However, it did kill the Wii U's and the marketing kind of sucked. So let's move to the Xbox One and PS4. Now, Sony released the PS4 in 2013 and Microsoft did later that year. And the reason why it wasn't really a war is because the PS4 sold really well, even more than the original PlayStation and Wii. And the Xbox One, well, wasn't bad. It did have lots of baffling features, especially with the original model, but the redesigns were actually pretty cool. And the Xbox One did have some highs, including backwards compatibility with some Xbox 360 and some original Xbox games, but the PS4 didn't really have to compete that much with its great exclusive games and best sales. So yeah, let's end the video. So, what did you guys think? I had lots of fun making this video and put lots of time into it, so if you enjoyed it, please comment down below and any ideas that you want me to do. So yeah, bye guys!